Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a tough case today, the murder of 10-year-old Sara Sharif.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And it raises so many questions.
We've got some sources to help us untangle it all,
Gotcha.
our goal, to understand not just what happened, but whether there were, mischances to protect her.
Right, like, could anything have been done? We see these cases, and it's easy to focus on the horror. But what about prevention? What about the systems?
Exactly. Okay, so first, who was Sara? The reports paint this picture of a happy kid, sparky, they said, loved to smile, loved to dance.
And that just makes the details of the abuse she suffered even more horrific.
Totally. The court testimony, it's just awful. Over 70 new injuries on her body.
When she died, yeah. 11 spinal fractures.
Bite marks, burns. It's just like how?
It points to a pattern of abuse, sustained abuse, not just like a one-time incident.
And then you have this detail about the hijab. They forced her to wear it to hide the injuries.
Yeah. Chilling, isn't it? It shows how abuse can be hidden right under our noses.
For sure. The judge didn't hold back, called it a campaign of torture.
Strong words, but deliberate.
So, legally speaking, what constitutes torture?
Legally, torture has to be intentional, inflicting severe pain and suffering, to punish, to coerce, intimidate. The judge used that word because it was systematic. It wasn't random. This was deliberate cruelty.
And the long-term impact, I mean, even if a child survives, that's got to be just devastating.
Absolutely. The physical scars, the emotional ones, forming healthy relationships, trust, all of that's impacted.
Sara's mom, Olga Daman, she called the perpetrators executioners. That's, I mean, just gut-wrenching.
I think it speaks to the betrayal. A parent entrusts their child to these people, and then this. Executioners implies no mercy. It's cold, it's calculated. It wasn't just a death. It was a systematic destruction of a life.
Okay, let's talk about those responsible. We have the father, Urfan Sharif.
Stepmother, Beinash Batool, and the uncle, Faisal Malik.
All three convicted. Sharif and Batool got life sentences.
With a minimum of 40 years for Sharif, 33 for Batool.
And Malik got 16 years for causing or allowing death.
Right, so legally there's a distinction. He wasn't directly involved in the beatings, but he was aware and did nothing.
So life sentence in the UK, that doesn't always mean they're in prison forever.
Right, those minimum terms. That's how long they serve before they're even considered for parole. And even then, there's no guarantee. They have to convince the parole board they're no longer a danger.
And then there's that confession note from Sharif, found near Sara's body.
He tried to retract it during the trial, actually.
Yeah, blamed Batool for a while. But then, ultimately, he accepted responsibility. What do you make of that? Changing his story.
Hard to say. Maybe protecting his wife at first, and then the guilt became too much.
Or maybe the evidence was just so overwhelming there was no point in denying it anymore.
Could be. Or maybe a bit of both. Remorse, but too little too late. Whatever the reason, it speaks to a messed up family dynamic.
For sure. And then they flee, all three of them, to Pakistan. The day before Sara's body is even found. Sharif calls the police from there, says he legally punished her.
And then they're hiding in cornfields.
Yeah.
Just desperate.
It's a crazy image. Like, just the level of fear. They knew what they'd done.
And we have to remember, there were 5 other children, Sara's siblings. They were taken to Pakistan, too.
Last we heard, they're in temporary care there. Just add another layer of tragedy to this whole thing. This case brought up a lot about homeschooling. The judge was pretty outspoken about the risks, especially when it's unsupervised.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's important to remember, homeschooling itself isn't the problem.
Right. Plenty of families do it well.
Exactly. But this case highlights a potential blind spot. When there's no oversight, it can be easier to hide abuse.
And Sara was pulled out of school after those bruises were noticed?
Which is a huge red flag. So then the question becomes, what safeguards were in place? How did this slip through?
The UK did have a register for kids not in school. But was that enough?
That's what everyone's asking now. And what more can be done?
It's a debate that's not going away anytime soon.
No, it shouldn't.
Okay, so we've got this horrific crime. We've got questions about homeschooling. But this goes even bigger, right?
Definitely. This is about child protection, period.
And we'll get into all that after a quick break.
It really does. This case, it makes you think about all the kids out there who might be in similar situations.
It's easy to feel helpless. Like, what can we as individuals really do?
That's where those bigger picture questions come in. Like with homeschooling. The judge raised some valid points about oversight,
Right. Some people are saying it's an attack on parental rights.
Yeah, you'll always have that debate. Freedom versus safety.
But kids need to be safe. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. No one's arguing that. But the question is, how do we strike that balance? How do we increase oversight without being overly intrusive?
Is there even a way to do that?
I think so. It's not about dictating what parents teach. It's about having some safeguards to make sure kids are okay.
Like what? What kind of safeguards are we talking about?
Regular check-ins could be one solution by qualified professionals, someone trained to recognize, the signs of abuse or neglect.
So like social workers going into homes.
Could be,
Uh,
or even just virtual check-ins, not to interrogate families, but to observe the child, see how they're doing, make sure their basic needs are met.
that's actually a good idea. It's not about micromanaging how they're being taught. It's about, like you said, making sure the kid is okay.
Exactly. It's that extra layer of protection,
Yeah.
especially for kids who might be isolated
Yeah.
without the social interaction of a regular school.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess it's a way to catch things early, before they escalate.
Exactly. Early intervention is so crucial.
What about mandatory reporters? In the UK, who's required to report if they suspect abuse?
So right now, it's teachers, social workers, healthcare providers. But there's talk of expanding that list.
To who? Who else would be included?
People who work with kids regularly. Coaches, religious leaders, even childcare providers. The idea is the more people who are trained to spot the signs, the better.
So it's like a community effort. We're all responsible.
Exactly. It takes a village. It's
Yeah.
not just up to the authorities. We all have to be vigilant.
Okay, so let's say someone is listening and they think, wait, maybe I've seen something. What resources are out there for families who are struggling or for people who want to help but don't know where to start?
There are so many organizations doing great work. Parenting classes, counseling, financial assistance programs. It's about tackling the problem from all angles.
So it's not just reacting to abuse, but trying to prevent it.
Exactly. Addressing the root causes, poverty, stress, lack of support.
It's heavy stuff. It makes you realize these systems, they're supposed to protect kids, but they're not perfect.
And that's the hard part. We have these tragedies, and we have to ask, what went wrong? Could we have done better?
And what do we do with that grief, that anger?
It has to be channeled into action, into change. Sarah's story can't be in vain.
So how do we do that? How do we turn this horror into something positive?
Sarah's case highlighted a lot of vulnerabilities in the system, but also just in how we think about child protection.
What do you mean?
Well, like you said, it's easy to feel helpless, but we all have a role to play. It starts with awareness, knowing the signs of abuse, knowing what resources are out there.
And knowing what to do if we suspect something.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to speak up. Trust your gut. A false alarm is better than staying silent when a child is being hurt.
Okay, so let's break that down. Someone's listening and they think, something's not right. What do they do?
First, trust your instincts. If you feel uneasy, there's probably a reason. Don't be afraid to ask questions,
Even if they're not sure.
especially then. It's better to be safe than sorry. You can contact your local child protection agency or the police. They're trained to handle these situations.
And you don't need concrete proof to report, right? Just a suspicion.
Right. You don't need to be a detective, just a concerned citizen.
That's good to know. I think a lot of people hesitate because they're, afraid of being wrong or overstepping.
And there's support for people making reports too. You don't have to do it alone.
We'll definitely include some links to resources in the show notes for this episode because it's not always obvious, is it? The signs of abuse.
No, it's not always black eyes and broken bones.
So what should people be looking for besides physical injuries?
Changes in behavior, sudden mood swings, increased anxiety or fear, aggression, even regressing to younger behaviors.
So things that seem out of character for the kid.
Exactly. Kids don't always have the words to say what's happening, so they communicate through their behavior.
That's a good point. We need to be paying attention to those things.
We do. And we need to create an environment where kids feel safe to speak up, where they know they'll be listened to, believed.
Okay, I want to ask about the perpetrators in this case. What do we know about them? What might have led them to do something so horrific?
It's important to understand, knowing their background isn't about excusing their actions.
Of course not. But it might help explain the how, the why.
Right, and there were some things that came out during the trial. Sharif, for instance, he had a history of violence, not just with Sarah. There was a pattern there.
So this wasn't like an isolated incident?
No, which points to a bigger issue of domestic violence. It's the cyclical nature of abuse.
And Batool, the stepmother.
She tried to shift the blame at first, but ultimately the court found her complicit. She participated in the abuse, the physical punishment, the emotional torment.
So she wasn't just a bystander.
No, she was actively involved.
And what about Malik, the uncle?
His conviction, causing or allowing death, it suggests he knew what was happening and did nothing.
Which makes him complicit too, in a way.
Exactly. It's a chilling reminder that silence in the face of abuse can be just as damaging as the abuse itself.
Okay. It's easy to get lost in all the legal stuff, the policy debates. But we have to remember at the heart of this is a little girl.
We can't forget Sara.
The sources describe her as, full of life. She loved to dance, to sing. She even played guitar.
It's those details, those glimpses of who she was that make this even more tragic.
Right. She wasn't just a case file. She was a person with hopes and dreams.
And it's those dreams that we have to fight for other kids.
Yeah.
To make sure this doesn't happen again.
So, big question. Where do we go from here? What are the takeaways from Sara's story? What can we learn?
I think the biggest lesson is child protection is on all of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just social services. It's not just the police. We all have to be vigilant. We have to be willing to speak up.
But speaking up can be scary, right? What if you're wrong?
It's a valid fear. But think about it this way. A false alarm, that's an inconvenience. Staying silent when a child is being hurt, that's potentially devastating.
So what's the advice for someone who's listening and they're not sure, but they have that feeling that something's not right?
Trust your gut. If something seems off, it probably is. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Talk to the child if it's safe to do so. Talk to someone you trust. And if you're still concerned, report it.
To the authorities.
Yes, they're the ones who can investigate, who can get the child the help they need.
And there's support for people making reports too, right? You're not alone in this.
Absolutely. There are organizations, hotlines, websites. You can find information and support online. We'll make sure to link to some of those resources in our show notes.
Great. Okay, so we've covered a lot. We talked about the specifics of Sara's case,
The legal aspects, the sentencing.
the homeschooling debate, and the bigger picture, the systemic issues. But what about the emotional side, the trauma?
That's a crucial part of this conversation. The psychological impact of abuse can be profound and long-lasting.
What do you mean? Give us some examples.
Well, imagine a child's sense of safety, their trust in the world. Abuse shatters that. It can lead to anxiety, depression, PTSD, problems with relationships, self-harm. It's a lot for a young person to carry.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. And the thing is, these wounds, they don't just disappear. If they're not addressed, they can follow a person into adulthood.
So therapy is essential.
Absolutely. It gives kids a safe space to process what they've been through, to learn coping mechanisms. It's the beginning of healing.
And the family needs support too, right?
Definitely. Abuse affects the whole family system. So it's important to address those dynamics as well, to create a more stable environment.
This has been, really eye-opening, but it's also incredibly sad.
It is. It's hard to face these realities. But we have to. If we want to protect children, we can't look away.
You're right. Sara's story, it's a tragedy, but it's also a call to action.
It is. It's a reminder that we can't be complacent. We have to be vigilant. We have to speak up.
So what can we do? What concrete steps can people take? It's easy to feel overwhelmed. Like, what difference can one person make?
You'd be surprised. It starts with education, knowing the signs, knowing the resources, even just talking to your kids about healthy relationships, about boundaries. That plants a seed.
So knowledge is the first step.
It is. And then action. Support organizations that are fighting child abuse. Volunteer your time. Donate money. Raise awareness.
And we can contact our lawmakers, right? Push for stronger policy.
Absolutely. Our voices matter.
So it's a combination of things. Individual actions, collective action, all of it makes a difference.
It does. It creates a culture where child abuse is unacceptable, where kids feel safe, where they can thrive.
Well said. This deep dive, it's been a lot to process, but it's been important.
I agree. It's not an easy conversation, but it's a necessary one.
Sara's story might be over, but our work to protect other kids, that's just beginning.
And that's the key takeaway. We all have a part to play.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to talk about something that's, I think, a little unsettling. We've talked about homes, schools, but abuse can happen anywhere, right?
That's the scary truth, and it often does.
So are there places, environments that we should be, scrutinizing more closely?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is yes. We tend to focus on the obvious. Schools, homes. But what about after-school programs? Sports teams? religious organizations, even online spaces.
It's like anywhere kids are.
Exactly. And it's often hidden in plain sight because abusers are good at manipulating situations, at appearing trustworthy.
So it comes back to vigilance.
It does. We can't just assume that because a place seems safe, it is. We have to be aware. We have to be asking questions.
I keep thinking about Sarah and all the missed opportunities, the things that could have been done differently. Could anything have saved her?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The one that haunts us. And honestly, there's no way to know for sure.
But we can learn from it.
We have to. We have to look for those turning points, those moments where maybe things could have gone a different way.
So like when Sarah was pulled out of school, that was a huge red flag.
It was. And maybe if the school had pushed harder, done a home visit, maybe things would be different.
So it's about not just accepting things at face value when a child's safety is involved.
Exactly. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to be a little suspicious.
And what about social services? Were there points where they could have, I don't know, intervened more effectively?
It's hard to say without knowing all the details, but it's worth asking those questions. Did they have any prior contact with the family? Were any reports made? And if so, what happened?
So it's about holding the system accountable.
It is. Not to assign blame, but to learn from the past, to make sure it doesn't happen again.
This whole deep dive, it's made me realize we all have a responsibility here. It's not just up to the authorities, it's up to all of us.
I agree. It's a collective responsibility.
What if we're wrong? What if we misinterpret something?
That's a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. Think about it. A false alarm, that's an inconvenience. Failing to act when a child is being hurt, that's a tragedy.
So bottom line, what can our listeners do to help?
Be aware, be informed, know the signs, know the resources, talk to your kids, and if you see something, say something.
Because it's better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely. Every child deserves to be safe.
This has been, really heavy, but really important. Thank you for sharing your expertise and for, giving us some hope that we can make a difference.
Thank you for having me. It's been a privilege. And remember, even small actions can have a big impact. We can all be part of the solution.
That's a good note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another case, another conversation. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and stay involved. It's a sobering thought that even with all the systems, all the efforts, there are still kids out there suffering. And it makes you wonder, are there places, environments that we should be, scrutinizing more closely?
That's a really good point. We focus on the obvious, right? Schools, homes, but abuse can happen anywhere.
Right. And it's often hidden, isn't it? Like masked by this facade of normalcy.
Exactly. It could be happening right under our noses.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't even know it.
So where else? What are we missing?
Think about places where kids gather. After-school programs, sports teams, religious institutions, even online. The digital world, it's a whole other landscape.
It's true. And we've seen how abusers can use those platforms to groom kids, to exploit them. It's terrifying.
It is. And it's why we can't let our guard down. Just because a place seems safe doesn't mean it is.
Okay. This has been weighing on me. Throughout this whole deep dive, we've talked about the system, the failures, the missed opportunities. But it's hard not to ask, could anything have saved Sarah if someone had stepped in sooner, if things had been different?
It's the question that always lingers. And it's a tough one. Because we can analyze, we can speculate, but we can't go back in time.
That doesn't mean it's a pointless question, right? We have to learn from this.
We absolutely do. If we can identify those turning points, those moments where maybe things could have gone a different way, then maybe, just maybe, we can prevent it from happening to another child.
So like when they pulled Sarah out of school, that was a huge red flag.
Huge. And what if the school had, pushed a little harder, insisted on a home visit, talked to both parents?
Instead of just accepting their explanation.
Right. A little healthy skepticism when a child's safety is involved. That can make all the difference.
Okay, so what about social services? Was there anything they could have done differently?
Again, it's hard to say without all the information, but were there any prior reports? Did they follow up on those reports? Did they communicate effectively with other agencies?
So it's about looking at the whole system.
It is. And making sure those safeguards are in place and that people are following them, because the system is only as good as the people running it.
This deep dive has been, it's been a lot. And it's left me feeling, a sense of urgency. Like we can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix this.
I agree. This isn't someone else's problem. This is on all of us.
But where do we even start?
It starts with awareness, with educating ourselves, knowing the signs of abuse, knowing what resources are available.
Okay, so knowledge is step one. Then what?
Action. If you see something, say something. Don't be afraid to report it. Support organizations that are fighting child abuse. Talk to your kids about healthy relationships, about boundaries. Every little bit helps.
Because ultimately, this is about saving lives.
It is. It's about protecting the most vulnerable among us.
Well, this has been a really powerful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me. It's been a privilege.
And to our listeners, thank you for being here. We know this was a tough one, but we hope you'll take what you've learned today and share it with others. Spread the word, start conversations, and be that voice for children who can't speak for themselves. We'll be back soon with another deep dive, another chance to learn, to grow, and to make a difference. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and stay involved.